As noted in my review of Far Cry 4, I was genuinely apprehensive about investing my time and money in this series due to my short, mostly disappointing time with Far Cry 2. I eventually gave the sequels a chance and found myself satisfied and excited when a new game was announced. Yet that apprehensive, cautious feeling returned with the announcement of a promised full-blown sequel to Far Cry 4. Rather than stick with the formula that had become the series' norm, Ubisoft Montreal stripped the game of mostly everything that we Far Cry players had become accustomed to. How? Because Far Cry Primal takes the series back some 12,000 years into the past, with the promise of no guns, cars, or even the incredibly fun and beneficial wingsuit. Primal had the potential of alienating anyone who loved what made the last games what they were, but there was still a chance that everything would work out and give the series a new lease on life by embracing its up-to-now unknown primitive roots. Similar to every Far Cry other than the second iteration, Far Cry Primal allows the player to control a named character with his own identity. In this case, Takar, as he enters a land inhabited by several groups waging war against one another called Oros. Takar is presented as a simple hunter trying to survive alongside his fellow tribesmen called Winja. But things get a lot more complicated for Takar when a food hunt goes wrong and he is forced to save a young woman from being eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. What comes from Takar's single action is what jumpstarts the plot. While there are obvious fundamental changes how the game plays compared to its predecessors, the general setup when it comes to the gameplay isn't too different, even if the setting is nothing like Far Cry 4 or the prior games. Gamers can liberate the equivalent of outposts to create fast travel points, craft useful items and pouches by collecting random items such as plants and bones, and hunt animals so Takar can eat raw meat to heal himself. After reacclimating myself to the controls and what I was given in terms of weaponry, I took to the game like a fish to water, doing pretty much everything in the right order, unlike what I did in Far Cry 3, by clearing areas and collecting everything from sticks to rocks to even animal hides. I upgraded my weaponry and my pseudo-armor that allowed for quicker kills and an enhanced ability for Takar to survive in the coldest of areas. Close to 30 hours after the beginning, I watched the Platinum Trophy pop and the credits roll. Without any multiplayer modes this time around, there wasn't much else to do after Takar wrapped up his brutal campaign. Far Cry Primal had the initial promise of being nothing like its predecessors, yet still embraced the essence of what made the previous games enjoyable. Rather than Takar becoming a slightly magical Rambo, Far Cry Primal sees the player turn a character into Hunter the Barbarian thanks to the understandable lack of weaponry, compared to every other Far Cry before it, as Takar is only given 3 main upgradable weapons, a bow, a spear, and a club. Since the player isn't allowed the ability to wield everything from pistols to rocket launchers due to obvious reasons, Primal sees a reworking of the fundamental gameplay, so stealth is the focus. The first few hours when the player's initial weapons are noticeably weak compared to what the enemies are wielding showcases just how effective stealth can be in Primal. If you fail to stay hidden and everything breaks loose during the introductory hours, it can mean sure death. And that doesn't just apply to when encountering human foes. One of the reasons death is something that the player will get used to early in the game is due to the fact that developers didn't rework the game's melee system, something that is much more important in Primal than any other Far Cry game. Without block or dodge buttons, melee combat feels like a staggering mess that leaves the car flailing wildly around, randomly hitting whatever's near him. There's definitely a lot to be desired when it comes to the melee combat in Primal. Thankfully, as one progresses in the game, so does the ability to make stronger weapons, tame animals to serve you in battle, and store up more usable items that anyone should be able to carry while wearing a skirt and some furry ankle pads. In Far Cry 4, there was a slight expansion when it came to the animal kingdom, roaming throughout the last game were animals ready to kill at will. The same applies in Primal, but the system expands due to Takar's Beastmaster abilities. With a little bit of bait made from collected meat thrown in almost any direction will attract a wild animal that Takar can sneak up on and tame with the tap of a button by the player. These animals, tamed, become not only allies that can scare away local wildlife while traversing Oros, but also are invaluable in battle as each controllable animal has specific abilities, like the jaguar not being able to be detected by another adversary when one kills. Depending on the gamer's playstyle, certain beasts might suit one better than others, as animals such as bears and honey badgers have different base abilities. That gives the player an idea what to expect from these creatures in battle. Certain beasts can also be ridden, helping alleviate the problem of not having vehicles in the game for those who either don't like fast traveling, or a certain fast travel point isn't beneficial for one's destination. But no animal is more important in this game than the owl, the first animal Takara tames. For those who have played the previous games and remember using the lead character's camera to tag, enemies will love utilizing the owl in battle. Not only does the owl tag adversaries, the creature can also attack enemies by dropping bombs. In a lot of ways, the lacking of typical weaponry seen in other Far Cry games is made up for in Primal through the implementing of animals in effective ways. Not only can Takara tame beasts while preparing to fight off copious amounts of enemies with a fire-ignited club, he can also go on a liquid concoction-fueled scouring trips featuring quirky hallucinations and confused adversaries, protect traveling tribesmen by tackling incoming foes, free hostages under the cover of darkness, down fortresses, and even hunt fearsome beasts that have to not only be tracked but also taken down during potential phases across various regions of the map. Random events also occur during the playthrough that usually involves Takara either freeing a lone ninja from his captors, or settling a bloody squabble through violence, or even chasing down couriers. While there's a lot to do in Oros, one of the biggest disappointments when it comes to the mission structure is the lack of bell towers. Instead of being able to climb tall structures in an effort to embrace your inner parkour athlete while exposing more of the in-game map, bonfire areas at first appear to be the primitive form of bell towers, where the player must find a way to scale rocky terrain and ignite a pillar of sticks to claim the area. Unfortunately, bonfires soon become nothing more than smaller enemy outposts where the player has to kill 3 or 4 adversaries before lighting the fire. Bonfires feel unnecessary, especially compared to both larger outposts and the bell towers seen in previous games. Thankfully, most everything else about the environment that is Oros feels vibrant as it is dangerous. There are mountainous, snow-covered areas to traverse, lush fields where one can find wild boars and deers grazing, extensive caves possessing paintings and one of the near 200 collectibles. There's a day and night cycle that actually restocks certain items in the stock located at every fast travel location every morning. The beauty of Oros does fluctuate when some of the textures in these various locales appear rather flat, including waterfalls. And then there are times when the vegetation can become overwhelming as enemies blend in almost too well with their surrounding before one realizes what's even going on. One of the biggest positives about Far Cry 4 was the ability to play with friends both in co-op and multiplayer environments. Rather than improve on what the series was building towards when it came to multiplayer modes, Primal abandons it all to embrace the single-player aspect that made the series what it once was. For some, this is a big step backwards as replayability is severely cut down. And then there's the plot. The Far Cry franchise has never been one to present a strong narrative, and the developer's promise of delivering something grand during Far Cry 4 failed to live up to his expectations. Very little was stated about the game's plot pre-release, and for good reason. There is not much to cover when reviewing Primal's plot. As noted earlier, Takara and his tribe are at war with 2 other tribes who are also fighting each other. These tribes, the Udam and the Azila, want to rule Oros through the bloodshed of their enemies. With only a little more than a dozen story missions to craft the story, Primal refuses to use his time wisely and ends up utilizing a few cutscenes here and there while the player is taken through the story missions that follow the same tired open world game formula of go get this, go kill that, or go burn that down, without much to differentiate itself from the rest of the competition. The main mission structure could be a lot more forgivable if the story wasn't so disappointing and at times non-existent. One believing that Primal being in a primitive setting would encourage a primitive plot doesn't take away from the fact that there's little incentive given to the player to enjoy what little makes up the plot. There are also secondary characters that the player must gather to join the tribe while they help him learn new abilities and offer missions. These secondary characters, while intriguing, rarely get any screen time other than the Witch Doctor Tensei. One major gameplay addition associated with these secondary characters is village building. In Far Cry Primal, the player is given the ability to improve Takara's small village by completing missions to gain more villagers, and collecting items that can be used to create huts for the secondary characters. But that's it. Unlike other recent games with village building such as Fallout 4, improving Dakar's original HUD only slightly changes the look of his home and the homes of others while opening up the option of learning more skills and attaining some better tools. While it's definitely helpful to make the game easier for the player, it doesn't feel necessary both for the person playing and the game itself. If there's one thing Primal got right compared to its predecessor, it's boss battles. In Far Cry 3 and 4, the lead character downed major villains during cutscenes that the player had no control over. This time there are actual non-QuickTime event boss battles where the player kills the top adversary in somewhat grand fashion. Though there is plenty to do in Oros via side quests, the quests not connected to the main story suffer from the same problems as the main story missions by being too similar in nature. If you saved one pack of hostages, assassinated an Udom commander, or liberated a very hard level outpost, most likely you'll do it in the exact same fashion the next time. The great amount of variety actually becomes less varied before the game reaches the halfway point because the amount of weapons just isn't there. The collectibles don't add much to the game as well. Animal Buddy AI can become a little too intrusive even when the player doesn't command a beast to do anything. But if there's one major plus regarding the game when you look at who made Primal, it's this. I didn't encounter a single noticeable glitch during my 30 hours of playing. Far Cry Primal continues to embrace the template of make your own fun when it comes to open world video games. Sadly, most of that fun happens outside of the story, and the main incentive to continue through slowly fades as the plot progresses, just like its predecessors. Like the other Far Cry games that came before it, Primal feels grand, yet all too familiar. The gameplay is exceptionally fun thanks to the restructured dependence on stealth while battling enemies, but the story is once again lacking without much intrigue, let alone inspiration. There's plenty to do in the game, but obviously similar in nature as you pick a mission, read what it entails, and understand that it's almost exactly like what you did earlier on a different part of the map. But it's still mind-numbingly good fun mostly throughout. If you enjoyed the last few Far Cry games or simply like solid, if somewhat unspectacular first-person shooting open-world games, you'll actually enjoy this beastly trek through a land before time. But only if you either rent it or get it on sale, as it doesn't feel worthy of the $60 price tag, mostly thanks to the game's lack of replay value, for those who go out of their way to experience as much as possible on their first playthrough. And seriously, who wouldn't enjoy riding the back of a bear while taking down enemies?